The new G.I. Joe classified Big Ben has been deployed in plastic-free packaging, and I like the fact that he's number 77 in the range, because I was born in 1977. Now let's take a closer look at the box. Who gives a shit?
Hey guys, MCU Clutch here with another figure review. Next up is the Hasbro G.I. Joe Classified Series number 77.
And collectible fans, welcome G.I. Joe Classified Series fans. Look at this
Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy.
There are a lot of good reviews on YouTube of the new G.I. Joe Classified Big Ben action figure, but they all cover the same stuff. The packaging, the articulation, the sculpting, the accessories, etc. And that's cool if that's what you're looking for. But if you want a breakdown of this figure from a British military perspective, then you've come to the right place. I'm going to be inspecting everything from Big Ben's uniform, to his kit and equipment, to his weaponry. And I'll discuss what the G.I. Joe team got right, what they got wrong, and where they could have improved. So if you want to see if Big Ben can cut the mustard and pass S.A.S selection, then stay on this frequency and maintain radio discipline.
5 miles up and 200 miles behind enemy lines. Carrying weapons and a pack weighing over 100 pounds, they're about to launch themselves into the darkness. This is the S.A.S.
Currently on second assignment with the elite special operations force known as G.I. Joe, Staff Sergeant David Big Ben Bennett is also a member of Her Majesty's 22nd Special Air Service Regiment, the S.A.S.
It's a regiment about which much has been said and written, but little is known for certain by the public at large. Often units of the S.A.S. are operating in a politically sensitive environment, where the need for secrecy is paramount.
In order to become a member of the S.A.S, candidates must pass a rigorous selection process. The course lasts for 6 months, and the first phase is known as aptitude. This phase pits the candidates against the unforgiving terrain of the Welsh Mountains, and it is physically, intellectually, and emotionally exhausting. And it's designed to be. This month-long phase culminates in Exercise Long Drag, which is a forced march covering a 64-kilometre distance through marshes and rough hilly terrain, carrying in excess of 55 pounds of equipment. The march must be completed in less than 20 hours, and it is a gruelling test of self-motivation, endurance and land navigation. Big Ben completed this march in a fraction of the allotted time, and then volunteered to go back out on the mountains and help search for candidates who got lost on the hills. I completed the long drag in just under 18 hours, and it was easily one of the most challenging experiences of my entire life. Seriously, it was fucking gash.
Many come forward to join the S.A.S, but few will be chosen. Out of every 100, perhaps 15 will finally make it, possibly only 5.
Staff Sergeant David Bennett goes by the codename Big Ben, and this name is inspired by the nickname for the Great Bell of the Great Clock of Westminster in London, England. The ladies also call him Big Ben because he's got a massive dick. After passing S.A.S selection and joining the 22nd Special Air Service Regiment, Big Ben participated in the initial reconnaissance operations of the Falklands Campaign in 1982.
In the Falklands, the S.A.S directed air attacks around Stanley from a covert, well-concealed observation point overlooking the town. They remained concealed for up to 4 weeks before its eventual recapture.
The design of Big Ben's uniform is heavily inspired by what S.A.S troopers wore in combat during the Falklands War, and he wears boots, trousers, a jacket, gloves and a winter cap. So let's break these down from top to bottom. Big Ben wears a winter hat, and this is an essential piece of clothing for troopers operating in the cold climate of the South Atlantic Theatre. This hat remains faithful to the one worn by the original 3 3/4 inch Big Ben action figure that was released in 1991. Yet I've heard a lot of reviewers say that this looks like a Russian hat, but this is actually a British Army issued winter hat. It was extremely cold in the Falklands when the British task force arrived in 1982, so many S.A.S troopers wore this thick warm hat to protect themselves from the elements. The winter hat was issued with either a white or green coloured faux fur lining and was stitched together with a British DPM camouflage fabric. The white lining was suitable camouflage for this conflict because it did snow in areas of the Falklands. However, this modern trooper is supposed to be a Night Force version of Big Ben, and I feel the G.I. Joe team missed an opportunity here to update the hat to the green line version. The white version is not very suitable for night operations, so they should have changed this up and taken that massive white target off Big Ben's head.
After basic skills have been taught, there is still much to learn. For the NATO role, the S.A.S. unit must be trained and equipped to work in difficult conditions and extremes of climate.
The windproof jacket worn by Big Ben is a British Army smock, and these are insulating outer layers that were first issued to the British Armed Forces in World War II. The British Army smock is one of the best field jackets ever made and is famous for its versatility and thoroughly great design. This makes the smock an essential piece of Special Forces clothing, and SAS soldiers never travel anywhere without one. The British Army smock has 4 front pockets, with 2 at breast height and the other pair situated below the waist, along with a hood permanently attached to the collar, and it looks as though Big Ben has his hood rolled up and tucked inside. Big Ben's smock also has woolen cuffs, and over the years different versions of the British smock have been issued, both with and without these cuffs. So while this is accurate, I always opted to wear a smock without woolen cuffs because that material can soak up a lot of rainwater and become very uncomfortable. I have no idea what the badge on the right shoulder of the smock is supposed to represent, but it looks like a griffin placed over a map of a part of the world that I do not recognise. The closest thing I could find resembling this is the badge of the Royal Air Force Air Mobility Wing, but that doesn't make any sense. Most likely this is the badge of a fictional unit created for the G.I. Joe universe, and I'm okay with it if that's the case. On the opposite shoulder of the smock is the British Union flag. In a combat scenario, British troops would normally wear a green or tan version of the Union flag, but there are also times when they do not want the enemy to identify them as being British.
The S.A.S, I fucking love those dudes. They'd roll through the chow hall and they've all got American flag patches on. I'm like, what's up with the patch? And he said, gotta blame it on somebody. Fucking assholes.
There's not much really to be said about Big Ben's combat trousers, other than the fact that I do not like the colour used here, although I do understand that this is a Night Force version, and that's why they've gone with this muted grey colour palette. He does score points though for having a map pocket on his thigh, and this pocket does exactly what it says on the tin. It's used by SAS troopers for carrying maps of the area they are operating in. Whilst on the Falkland Islands, Ben would have worn thicker gloves than these to protect his hands from the cold. However, this is still a decent pair of combat gloves. I always like to wear a pair of combat gloves that offer good knuckle protection to shield my hands from unnecessary injury. When it comes to Big Ben's combat boots, this is the least accurate element of his uniform. The original figure had boots and gaiters, and this is accurate to what SAS soldiers wore during the Falklands campaign, to prevent their boots and feet from getting sodden wet. Here the G.I. Joe team have opted to issue Ben with a pair of jungle boots that are made from an olive drab canvas with a leather toe and heel. Jungle boots are designed for use in hot, wet and humid environments, where a standard leather combat boot would be too uncomfortable to wear. Now if you're going to try and justify this by saying that the G.I. Joe team have simply updated his look because he's not supposed to be a Falklands War era soldier, then let me ask you this. Why is the rest of his entire uniform correctly designed for operating in a cold weather environment, but they've issued him boots suitable for a hot, humid jungle climate? It doesn't make sense, and would put this trooper at risk of getting frostbitten feet. Big Ben should be wearing a pair of thick, sturdy leather mountain boots in order to be properly attired for winter warfare. Finally, we have this gash fucking Han Solo buckle. No SAS trooper in the entire history of the regiment has ever worn a giant silver buckle like this, and if he did, he'd be laughed all the way out of Hereford.
So what colour is the boathouse at Hereford?
How the fuck should I know?
Now that we've inspected Big Ben's uniform, let's take a look at his personal kit and weaponry. This staff sergeant wears camouflage paint on his well-sculpted face, and the minimal application here is accurate to how troopers were photographed wearing camo face paint during the Falklands War. His face sculpt also looks remarkably like a 1980s Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Let off some steam, Bennett.
In his right ear he wears an earpiece and microphone, but he does not carry a radio. This definitely isn't a Bluetooth earpiece, as SAS soldiers do not, under any circumstances, go on operations carrying mobile phones.
The conventional forces of the British Army use no more than half a dozen different types of radio. The SAS use up to 30.
Instead, Big Ben is issued with this wanky Joe Pro communications device, and this is an extremely unwanted holdover from the early waves of this line, when the figures were still based on a futuristic G.I. Joe mobile app game. All members of an S.A.S. patrol will carry a shortwave radio for communicating with other members of that patrol, and at least one person will carry a radio capable of transmitting over longer distances in order to send sit reps and to call in airstrikes. The G.I. Joe team failed massively when they did not issue Big Ben with a radio of any kind. The machine pistol issued here is just fucking ridiculous, and this type of weapon system would never be carried by an S.A.S. soldier. If Big Ben were to use any type of machine pistol, it would usually be in an urban undercover role, and he would most likely employ the very reliable MP5K. Machine pistols like this are wildly inaccurate, especially when they don't have a secondary foregrip, and when Big Ben carries this in his thigh holster, the magazine sticks out so far that it would get snagged on everything and make it practically impossible to sit down. Perhaps they were inspired by this scene in the 1982 action movie Who Dares Wins, where the character of S.A.S. Captain Skellen carries an Ingram machine pistol, but it is important to remember that he is utilising a captured enemy weapon, and all the other S.A.S. troopers on the assault team are carrying MP5s. I also have no fucking idea where he carries his spare ammo. While there are a couple of pouches on the front of this drop leg holster, they are not the correct size or shape to carry spare magazines for this weapon system. This machine pistol has a removable suppressor, and when it's not attached to the weapon, it is carried on the back of his belt kit. The problem is that we're supposed to believe this suppressor is held in place with a single strap, and that it wouldn't get dislodged and lost when Big Ben is on patrol. The S.A.S. are trained to not leave any ground sign when operating behind enemy lines. Everything they carry in with them gets carried back out again.
For every act of necessary force, there may be several battles which were never fought, because the S.A.S., using their special skills, were able to learn of an enemy's intentions and frustrate their plans.
The S.A.S. do not leave any indication that they were ever in the enemy's backyard. Something as simple as a carelessly discarded ration pack wrapper informs the enemy that British troops have been in the area, whereas a piece of equipment such as a suppressor offers far greater intelligence, because if the equipment is not standard issue, it can provide evidence of Special Forces activity in a specific area. The XM250 is a belt-fed gas-operated light machine gun that features a carry handle and a working bipod, and the belt of ammunition is supplied in a box magazine that attaches to the underside of the weapon and allows the linked rounds to be fed into the feed tray. Unfortunately, the G.I. Joe team have issued a weapon system that is manufactured from very low quality materials, and the cheaper the weapon, the more likely it is to be inaccurate and unreliable. Many people believe the S.A.S. commonly use the Colt-made M4 rifle, but they actually employ a very similar looking variant of the Canadian DeMarco C8, because it features a cold hammer-forged barrel that is designed for operation in Arctic conditions. Light machine guns like the XM250 are most accurate when fired from the prone position, with the weapon system supported by the bipod. Yet when the S.A.S. first began using the 5.56mm Minimi in the 1980s, they quickly learned that the rigid plastic box magazines easily broke off the weapon when troopers hastily took up firing positions, so they switched out the plastic magazines for collapsible canvas ammunition carriers. One part of the S.A.S. ethos is the relentless pursuit of excellence, and this means constantly analysing your mistakes and doggedly looking for ways to improve. So I find it very unlikely that a lesson learned in the 1980s was forgotten in the modern era. The plastic box magazine is an unreliable method of carrying belted ammunition for a light machine gun, and would not be used by an S.A.S. soldier. Stupidly though, the G.I. Joe team have developed a left-handed trooper, and you can identify this by the fact that his left hand pivots up and down, while his right hand moves inward and outward. If you're wondering why this matters, it's because the XM250 and other similar belt-fed machine guns are designed to be operated right-handed. And the regiment doesn't care if you're left-handed, you have to learn to operate this weapon system with your right hand on the pistol grip. In the modern era, British Special Forces do not typically carry belted ammunition slung around their torso. S.A.S. machine guns prefer to carry linked ammo in pouches or backpacks to keep the rounds clean, because dirty ammunition will significantly increase the likelihood of weapon stoppages. While the original Big Ben did carry his ammunition in this fashion, likely because there is photographic evidence of S.A.S. troopers carrying belts of ammo across their chests in the Falklands, I still feel as though this is another example of where the G.I. Joe team could have made some improvements when modernising this trooper. But even if the S.A.S. were to carry belted ammunition around the chest, they definitely wouldn't carry that ammo attached to padded straps. Screw the fucking nut, Big Ben. I've never seen this shit in my life. Now we get to the totally fucking gash double-barreled assault rifle, and this weapon is an even dumber choice than having a machine pistol carried in a drop leg holster. While double-barreled ARs do actually exist, these have been made by civilian armourers as novelty weapons, and they do not actually serve any real-world purpose. Having 2 bolts in a rifle means there are twice the number of complex parts to maintain, double the opportunity for stoppages, significantly decreased accuracy, and you have to carry double the ammunition. Not that it really matters to this S.A.S. trooper, since the tight-ass G.I. Joe team have only issued him with 1 magazine anyway, whereas a real S.A.S. soldier going on operations would carry much more.
As much link as we can carry for the minimies, and 5.56 for the 203s.
When you consider that Special Forces are already known for the sheer amount of equipment that they have to carry into battle, they would never choose to carry a weapon that unnecessarily needed double the ammo of a standard assault rifle. In addition, the G.I. Joe team always seems to issue these weapons with the buttstocks permanently collapsed, yet this position is only intended to be used for storage or when parachuting. Whenever I would withdraw my weapon from the armoury, I would immediately extend the buttstock, because this is the best way to shoulder the weapon and secure a firm firing position. Another boneheaded decision is to have Big Ben carry his spare magazine on the back of his belt. Spare ammo needs to be carried in the most easily accessible position possible, so magazine pouches are attached to the front of the vest when wearing body armour, or on the hip of the belt when wearing webbing. Ammunition is even prioritised over water, so when wearing an assault vest like this, the ammunition is carried at the front, with the water bottles carried further around the waist. The final piece of equipment issued to Big Ben is a gas mask. The S.A.S. famously wear these respirators on counter-terrorist operations, such as when they freed the hostages who were held siege in the Iranian embassy at Prince's Gate in London in May of 1980.
There is a 4th and final role assigned to the regiment: counter-terrorism. The Counter-Revolutionary Warfare Wing trains and keeps itself in constant readiness to deal with a hijack, hostage-taking, or seizure of an embassy.
The S.A.S. wear gas masks on these types of operations because they often employ CS gas grenades, and because these respirators protect the soldiers from smoke inhalation and fire. Due to these potential operational hazards, all areas of a trooper's skin are also covered in flame-retardant clothing, yet here Big Ben has a large section of his neck exposed, revealing very poor skills and drills on his part. Get in there! The poor design of this respirator also restricts the trooper's head movement, because there is no joint at the top of the neck, so he cannot look down the sights of his rifle when firing from the prone position.
You want to be able to turn your head. It sure made backing out of the driveway easier.
At the time of the Iranian embassy siege, the British Army were issued with the S.6 respirator, whereas the one worn by this version of Big Ben looks more like the S.10 respirator, which replaced the earlier model in 1986. But if the G.I. Joe team were trying to update this trooper's equipment for a modern battlefield, then I'm not sure why they didn't issue him with the General Service respirator that replaced the S.10 respirator and was introduced in 2011. And this is my biggest issue with this trooper. Most of the issued weaponry is ultra-modern, but his clothing and equipment are still firmly rooted in the 1980s, and it makes for a confusing, nonsensical loadout. So pick a fucking lane. Either give him a modern load-carrying system and updated clothing, or fuck off those gash weapons and give him a GPMG and an MP5. The S.A.S. operate deep behind enemy lines in small teams and for protracted periods of time, and as such they need to be self-sufficient. This means that they need to carry a lot of kit and equipment to sustain themselves, and to remain an effective fighting force. As such, this soldier most certainly should have been issued with a lot more equipment than what he's been given here. At the very least, they should have given him a rucksack.
Successful, but also highly political. Often glamorized or criticized. Such activities tend to give this role of the regiment an unwanted and unwarranted prominence in the public mind.
All is not lost though, and with a little kit bashing you can make this soldier look a little more accurate. To create a better Falklands War version of Big Ben, you need to get rid of the thigh holster, swap out his boots and legs with outbacks, and then give him a rucksack and a classic looking M16 from Mark II designs. As you can see, this is far from perfect, but still a major improvement over the base offering from the G.I. Joe team. For the counter-terrorist role, you need to swap out the pistol and drop leg holster and issue him with a suitable weapons system such as an H&K MP5. I also would have given him a med kit.
Sometimes the S.A.S. patrol can extend a helping hand to a sick villager. All S.A.S. units receive some medical training.
A med kit definitely should have been standard issue for this trooper, but it wasn't, so that's another fail for the G.I. Joe team. And don't try to tell me that this is a med pouch because it's far too small. I mean, what's he carrying in this? A couple of plasters and a Panadol? Without these modifications though, the base offering is an unrealistic example of an S.A.S. soldier that leaves a lot to be desired. Before I pass my final judgment, I want to know how this new classified series trooper stacks up against the other candidates. So let's take a look back at the previous versions of this S.A.S. soldier.
They come from all units of the Army, and in some cases from civilian backgrounds. They volunteer to undergo a selection process which is not just rigorous, but also protracted.
The original Big Ben who enlisted in 1991 is still the best. His uniform, equipment and weaponry are all accurate to what S.A.S. troopers wore and carried during the Falklands campaign. While I'm not a fan of the way the character was depicted in the Deep cartoon,
jolly good show,
largely because he sounds far more like a well-educated British Army officer, and much less like an enlisted staff sergeant.
If you were on a 4-man patrol and the other 3 men refused to follow you, how would you handle it?
This still doesn't take anything away from this excellent trooper. He wears gaiters and a winter hat, he carries a heavy Bergen and a satchel containing fragmentation grenades, and he is armed with the British Army General Purpose Machine Gun, the GPMG.
The man who performs badly under pressure in the artificial surroundings of the selection procedure will almost certainly be unable to cope in the trying conditions of the jungle. A spell in the jungle forms an early part of the 17-week period which follows the physical selection test.
The second version of Big Ben from 1993 lost all his equipment. He swapped out his green uniform for a set of very bizarrely coloured fatigues, and he's now armed with a ridiculous-looking sniper rifle. Enlisting in the year 2000, the Arctic version of Big Ben is an exemplary soldier who carries the same equipment as the original Big Ben, with the camouflage altered for a winter environment. He does lose points for not having a bipod on his GPMG, and he should have been issued with either skis or a pair of snowshoes, but he gains props for wearing a US flag and maintaining plausible deniability.
One entire squadron exercises regularly in Arctic Norway. It is a training that was to be put to good use on the glaciers of South Georgia.
In 2002, Big Ben wore a camouflage uniform that was suitable for woodland operations, and he retained the winter hat and gaiters. He also carries 2 long firearms and a satchel with grenades. Carrying 2 weapons like this is impractical because dual wielding and firing from the hip belongs in Hollywood and not in the real world. If the G.I. Joe team ditched both of these weapons and then issued him with an M16 and a rucksack, they could have created a very unique version of this trooper, but as he stands, this soldier doesn't pass muster.
Training includes evasion and concealment. The men are given compasses and greatcoats, but no food. At this stage they are nearing the end of the 5-month period of continuation training. They are expected to escape and evade for a week over an 80-mile stretch of country.
Also enlisting in 2002, this variant of Big Ben retains the same weapons and equipment as the previously mentioned candidate, but he wears an odd combination of clothing. I do like that the winter hat now resembles the Green Line version, but the sky blue coloured smock would stand out like dog's balls on any battlefield.
Here's one, fella.
Then comes a taste of what it is like to be on the receiving end of capture and interrogation.
Open your legs. Open, open. Stand still. Stand still! In 2003, Big Ben ditched the windproof smock and started wearing a gold belt and carrying gold fragmentation grenades on his chest. And he is also unarmed.
Some fail this test. They will be returned to their regiment or unit, with the knowledge that they have done well to reach even this stage in the selection process.
What is the name of your unit?
I cannot answer that question.
Yes, you can.
The penultimate variant of Staff Sergeant Bennett was heavily armed for a mission deep behind enemy lines. His uniform and equipment closely resemble the original Big Ben, yet there are a number of alterations, some good and some bad. The belts of ammunition are removable, but this is the first instance of Ben carrying his ammo on padded straps. He also has a couple of grenades and a demolition satchel, but an S.A.S. soldier would never walk around with TNT printed on his equipment in bold red lettering. He does have a large Bergen that actually opens and is capable of carrying a lot of kit and equipment, and this is a welcome upgrade. Where I am least impressed though is with his machine gun. The G.I. Joe team have issued Big Ben with an M60 mounted with a fucking ridiculous optic, instead of giving him the British issued GPMG, which is a far more reliable weapon system than the American made M60. He does also have a grenade launcher that is carried in the Bergen when not in use, and a machete, although this wouldn't have been very useful on the Falkland Islands, and is typically carried on jungle operations. While a lot of his kit and equipment is accurate, I just can't get past the poor choice of primary weapon system.
When the need arises, their response time must be fast and their preparedness high. At the end of all this training, the S.A.S. are one of the most efficient and effective fighting forces in the world.
After testing all of these potential candidates, we've got 2 passes and 5 fails, and just like the real Special Forces selection course, that's a well below average success rate. So where do we stand on the G.I. Joe Classified Series Big Ben? I am far from impressed with this trooper. He left a lot of his equipment behind, he doesn't know how to correctly carry the kit that he does have, and his choice of weapons is not suitable for the mission at hand. If you think this vast catalogue of errors and mistakes can be excused by saying that the G.I. Joe universe is a fictional cartoon, then they should have made Big Ben a member of a fictional military unit. When the character was first introduced in 1991, his file card stated that he was a member of the 22nd Special Air Service Regiment, and this is one of the most militarily specific references to ever appear on a G.I. Joe file card. We all know that Stalker is a Ranger, but the creators never went as far as stating which Ranger unit he served in. Torpedo is a Navy SEAL, but his file card didn't make a distinct reference to a unit like SEAL Team 6. And Gung Ho is a Marine, but there was no mention of the 1st Marine Division or Marine Force Recon, or any other famous US Marine unit. This was a wise choice on the part of the writer Larry Hama, because the slightly vague details allowed for a lot of latitude with the character designs. Yet the day the G.I. Joe team decided to make this character a member of Her Majesty's 22nd Special Air Service Regiment, they took on a huge responsibility to portray the character accurately, and they nailed it in 1991, but for the Classified series they failed to do any research or apply any accurate real-world details, and ended up fumbling the grenade in their own trench.